That night shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. I woke to whispers, hidden files, and a truth no daughter should ever discover. A truth that's been chasing me for decades. If you want to uncover the shocking truth with me, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and join the journey. Don't forget to like and comment. Your thoughts might just reveal secrets too. My name is Evelyn Harper, and at 78, the nights feel longer than they used to. The lake outside my window used to comfort me with its gentle waves, but nowadays it feels more like a mirror one that insists on showing me the things I've spent a lifetime trying to forget. My husband would have known what to say to settle my nerves. My daughter would have wrapped her arms around me and told me it was only the past. But the past isn't gone. It's only hiding, waiting for the right crack in the dark to slip through. Tonight, as the wind rattles the shutters and the smell of old wood fills my living room, I find myself back at that one night. The night everything changed. I was 18, reckless in that innocent way that only sheltered girls know how to be. It was the 4th of July at my family's farmhouse, a yearly gathering where the soundtrack was laughter, country songs, and the crackling of fireworks echoing over the old barn roof. Fireflies drifted around the grass like tiny lanterns carried by invisible hands. My cousins were dancing barefoot, the music vibrating through the boards of the porch. My father had set out the grill. My mother was stirring her fruit punch, and everyone believed it would be just another perfect summer evening. They had no idea that the quiet tension between my mother and father wasn't from the heat. They had no idea it was about me. I went upstairs to grab more lemonade, simple, innocent. I remember humming one of the songs the radio wouldn't stop playing that month. I remember the floorboards creaking just a bit under my feet, the familiar smell of cedar polish sinking into my skin. I reached for the railing, leaned just slightly, and then there was the sharp crack of wood giving way. The way it sounded, so sudden, so violent, felt wrong, like someone snapping a bone. And in the split second before everything disappeared, I swear I felt something tug at the back of my shirt. Not pulling me back, but almost guiding me forward. Sending me over the edge, pain came in waves so thick I couldn't breathe. I remember Flash's faces leaning over me, fireworks exploding somewhere above. My cousin's voice begging me to stay awake. My legs looked wrong, twisted in shapes they shouldn't have been, and my arms trembled as if my bones had turned to dust. I tried to speak, but every word tasted like metal. Someone called for an ambulance, and when the stretcher wheels clattered against the gravel, the sound cut through me sharper than the pain. I opened my eyes again in what felt like a different universe. The ambulance. Cold air. Lights flickering. My mother stood above me, gripping the side rails so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her face was drained of color, and her eyes kept darting everywhere except at me. And then she said it, in a voice so broken it didn't sound like hers at all. No surgery. Not for her. Not again. Not again. The words carved themselves into me. I tried to ask what she meant. Tried to lift my hand, toward her. But she flinched away as if my touch burned. That was when I heard the EMT whisper to the paramedic beside him. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but pain has a strange way of sharpening certain senses. His voice dipped low, uncertain, rattled by something he had just read on his clipboard. But the record says she already has a guardian, and it's not her mother. The world around me seemed to freeze. Even the sirens sounded distant, echoing as if through water. A guardian? At 18, and not my mother. For the first time that night, the pain in my body wasn't the thing that terrified me. It was the sudden realization that the story of my own life might not belong to me at all. I always believed my mother's coldness was simply the product of a hard life, years of disappointments carved into her posture. The rigid way she folded her arms, the clipped tone she used for nearly everything. But sitting in that hospital room, my legs numb and my future suddenly uncertain, I realized there had always been something else beneath her silence. A quiet fear. A vigilance. As if she were hiding a piece of my life behind her back and daring anyone to try to take it from her. Growing up, she'd never let me keep school health reports, always intercepting them before I could read them. Whenever I asked why I had so many early checkups compared to other children, she'd say doctors were alarmists. That simple problems turn into lifelong sentences when you let the wrong people interfere. I thought she was just old-fashioned. I thought she was just overbearing. I was wrong. In the hospital room, I lay still as stone, unable to move anything below my waist. The white ceiling tiles blurred together, and the antiseptic smell felt like it was soaking into my skin. When Dr. Melinda Clay walked in, I knew immediately that something was off. She wasn't like the doctors my mother usually preferred, those older men. She could manipulate with guilt or intimidation. Dr. Clay was young, sharp-eyed, and not easily swayed. She studied my chart, flipping through pages with a slow, deliberate rhythm, then looked up at me with a wrinkle forming between her brows. "Evelyn," she said gently, "do you know a woman named Margaret Stone?" The name meant nothing to me, but when my mother, standing rigidly in the corner, heard it, her entire face cracked. Her fingers twitched around her purse strap, Her jaw clenched, and for the first time in my life, I saw panic flicker across her controlled expression. "That's enough," she snapped. "She doesn't need this right now. She needs rest." Dr. Clay didn't back down. "Mrs. Harper, this woman signed off on Evelyn's medical care several years ago. She has legal authority. I need to confirm my daughter is under my care," my mother hissed, stepping forward like a snake struck with a stick. "She has no guardian but me." But I couldn't even move my toes, couldn't feel the sheets brushing over my legs, could barely swallow the fear growing inside my chest. And still, my mother insisted I was fine, insisted I healed fast, insisted she would take me home immediately. When Dr. Clay refused to discharge me, my mother stormed out, leaving behind a cold draft that felt like a warning. Hours later, long after the hallway lights dimmed and the hospital quieted, a soft knock tapped against my door. A nurse slipped inside, a young woman with tired eyes and a name badge that read Lucy. She checked my vitals, glanced toward the closed door, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "I thought you should see this," she whispered. "It was in your file." My heart thrummed as I carefully unfolded the form. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges. Across the top, bold and unmistakable, were the words, "New Guardian, effective IME Dio Delawibelo." That, a signature, a looping, uneven scrawl, and it was mine, my name. Written in the hand of a child, I wasn't prepared for the icy wave that rolled through me. I don't understand," I whispered. How could I have signed this?" Lucy squeezed my hand, her expression tightening. "The date," she said quietly. "Look at the date." I lowered my eyes and read it. I was 6 years old in that moment. The hospital walls seemed to press in around me. My mother's lies weren't just about medical reports or doctors or my fall. She'd been hiding something much deeper. Something that began long before I turned 18, long before the railing broke. And for the first time in my life, I realized I might not actually know who I belonged to. Lena always had a way of bursting into a room like she owned the air inside it. Even in that hospital room, with the dim lights flickering and the steady beep of my monitor filling the silence, she strode in with the same fierce energy she'd carried since we were little girls. But the moment she saw me pale, helpless, pinned beneath blankets with no feeling in my legs, her bravado cracked. She pulled a chair to my bedside and sat without a word, her breath shaky, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for a piece she'd lost. Finally, she whispered, "Evelyn, I saw something. Or someone." I forced a smile. Everyone saw something that night. Fireworks, chaos. She shook her head. "Not that. Someone upstairs. Right before you fell." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag as she gathered her courage. "There was a man, Evie, a tall man in a gray suit. Not family. Not anyone I recognized. I saw him standing by the railing, and when it broke, he ran." My heart fluttered uncomfortably, like a trapped bird. "Lena, come on." People were drinking. There were shadows. The light. "I know what I saw." She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "And you know I wouldn't lie to you." I looked away, because deep down her words scraped against something I didn't want to acknowledge. A memory that was more feeling than image. The sense that someone had been behind me, too close, too silent still. I shook my head. It must have been one of my cousins. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a Polaroid. The edges were smudged, the colors too bright in some places and too dark in others. Typical for that old camera she insisted on carrying everywhere. She handed it to me with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "I was trying to get a shot of the fireworks reflecting in the window," she said, "but when I looked at it later..." I lifted the picture. At first, all I saw were streaks of red and blue light bursting across the glass. Then my eyes adjusted, widening as the shapes behind the glare sharpened. A silhouette, broad shoulders, a gray suit with a stiff collar, the faint outline of a face turned slightly to the side, too much in shadow to make out, yet instantly unnervingly familiar. My breath caught. "Lena, no. It's impossible." But she wasn't finished. She gently tapped the lower corner of the photo. "Look." And when I looked closer, the air in my lungs turned cold. His hand-long, thin fingers, unnaturally still rested on my shoulder. Except I never remembered anyone touching me. I didn't even remember anyone standing behind me when I reached for the railing. The image felt like a lie, a violation, as if someone had stepped into my past and left fingerprints I never knew were there. Lena swallowed hard. "He's the same man, Evie. The one who followed us when we were 10? The one you described perfectly, even though I only saw glimpses. The one your mother insisted you made up?" I let the Polaroid fall onto the blanket, my pulse thundering in my ears. That old memory, me and Lena walking home from school under the autumn sun, the crunch of leaves beneath our shoes, and the prickling sensation of being watched pressed sharply into my mind. I remembered turning around and seeing him, a tall man in a suit too formal for a weekday afternoon, watching, following. But my mother, furious, dragged me inside and told me never to speak of him again, that he wasn't real, that I was being dramatic, yet here he was. In a photograph, at 18, watching me fall, a cold certainty settled into my bones, heavier than any cast. The accident wasn't an accident, and the man I'd been told didn't exist had been woven into my life far longer and far deeper than I dared admit. And suddenly, I understood why my mother looked terrified every time his name, his shadow, or even the memory of him brushed too close to the truth. Pain has a strange way of sharpening time. Each minute in that hospital room stretched so thin it felt like it could snap, leaving me suspended in a place where every breath reminded me of what I might lose forever. 3 fractures. Spinal trauma. Words the doctor spoke quietly, but urgently, as if volume alone might push my mother into reason. They explained the risks again and again: nerve damage, permanent loss of movement, the slow withering of muscles if we waited too long. Every specialist echoed the same warning. I needed surgery, and I needed it fast, but my mother stood at the foot of my bed like a sentinel refusing entry to an invading army. No, cutting into her, she barked, her voice cold and unwavering. Not like before. Before, the word clung to the air like smoke. I tried to sit up, but the pain shot through my spine in a venomous line. "Mom," I whispered, "what do you mean before?" Instead of answering, she stared at me with an expression halfway between fear and fury. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. And then, like a startled animal, she backed toward the bathroom and locked the door. I heard the click of the lock, followed by a muffled thud as she slid to the floor behind it. I listened to her breath hitching in heaven, frantic-like. She was terrified of something I couldn't see, or didn't remember. The doctors tried to reason with her. Dr. Clay even threatened court intervention. But my mother refused, demanding I be discharged immediately. Insisting she would take care of things at home, they denied her, thank God. But her presence poisoned every corner of the room until even the nurses walked cautiously around her. Later, a nurse I hadn't met before came in during the shift change. She was older, with gray streaks in her curls and a calm, almost maternal softness in her voice. She checked the monitors, adjusted the blanket around my legs, then leaned close enough that I could feel her breath on my cheek. "We filed a mandatory report, sweetheart," she whispered. "For your safety?" I blinked. "A report? For what?" The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the closed bathroom door. "Your mother said you're enrolled in some long-term medical study, that you've been part of it since childhood, that certain interventions like surgery could interfere with the experiment." My blood ran cold. "That's insane." She nodded quietly. "I agree. But we had to file, and social services will come by in the morning." A loud crash sounded from inside the bathroom. The nurse jerked upright. "I'll get security," she said, slipping out quickly. I lay there, heart pounding, staring at that door as shadows crawled along the edges. My mother didn't come out. Not for hours. And in that silence, I wondered what she was hiding so desperately that she'd let me risk paralysis, rather than allow a surgeon near me, something she thought was worse than losing my legs forever. Sometime long after midnight, the hallway grew still. The clatter of carts and muted conversations faded into a quiet so deep it felt unnatural. I must have drifted in and out of sleep because the next thing I remember is the faint rasp of paper sliding across tile. I opened my eyes. A folded note lay on the floor. Just inside my doorway, no footsteps, no voices, no shadow slipping past the glass panel, just the note. My fingers trembled as I reached down and grabbed it, unfolding the creased paper with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. Inside, written in jagged, hurried handwriting, were 6 words: "Do not consent to surgery. The truth is in the basement." I read it again, and again. Each time, my stomach tightened further. Because the hospital didn't have a public basement not one patients could access anyway. But the farmhouse I grew up in did, and my mother kept it locked for as long as I could remember. I stared at the door where she hid. Feeling the weight of the secret, she refused to speak, pressing through the walls. And for the first time since the fall, I understood something horrifying. My broken body wasn't the danger. The truth was, the house felt different after the hospital. Smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were listening, waiting, judging every slow, shaky step I took. I had a walker, flimsy and cold under my palms, but I refused to let it keep me from what I needed to do. My mother hovered like a storm cloud the first 2 days, checking the locks, unplugging the phone, even sleeping in a chair outside my room, watching me as though I might remember something she wasn't ready to confront, something she needed me ignorant of. But on the 3rd night, she left for her shift at the nursing home. I waited exactly 10 minutes after the door clicked shut, staring at the ceiling, counting each second as if it held its breath with me. Then, gripping the walker, I forced myself upright. My legs trembled violently, but they held just barely. I hobbled down the stairs one step at a time, each creak sounding like an alarm. When I reached the kitchen, I felt the cold draft seeping from beneath the basement door, like the exhale of something that had been waiting years to be disturbed. My mother always said the basement was moldy, unsafe, full of rusty nails and broken tools. She was a meticulous liar, specific enough to sound reasonable, vague enough to discourage questions. But I was done being afraid of shadows she created. The basement door groaned when I opened it. The wooden stairs descended into darkness so thick it felt alive. I flicked the light switch. It buzzed, flickered, then bathed the basement in a sickly yellow glow. The air smelled of metal, dust, and something faintly medicinal. I descended slowly, gripping the rail with one hand and my walker with the other. The basement looked exactly how she always described it: boxes, broken furniture, old holiday decorations thrown into chaotic piles. But I knew my mother. She hid the truth in plain sight. Beneath layers of ordinary things, it didn't take long to find it. Behind the leaning stack of Christmas boxes, old wreaths, deflated snowmen, a cracked nativity set, something metal glinted under the light. A file cabinet, rusted, with a broken padlock hanging uselessly from the latch. My pulse surged. I tugged the drawer open with both hands, wincing at the sting in my lower back. The contents inside made my knees buckle. Hospital bracelets, at least a dozen, all with my name, but different dates, some years apart, some just months, all with different patient numbers, like I'd been admitted repeatedly for reasons no one told me. Below them, several birth certificates, each one claiming I was born on a different date, same name, same mother listed, but signatures that didn't match, paper that had yellowed unevenly, ink that looked too fresh on others. I felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath me had cracked open. Then came the Polaroids. Me as a toddler, pudgy cheeks, curls bouncing, the same small smile, but each picture showed me with a different woman. One holding me at a park, one feeding me in a high chair, one standing outside a clinic, her grip on my arm a little too tight. None of them were my mother. At the very bottom of the drawer, wrapped in plastic, was a cassette tape, a label written in neat block letters, Harper Case Renewal Cycle Number 3. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. I found an old player on a shelf, dusted it off, pushed the tape inside, and pressed play. Static filled the air, followed by a man's voice. Calm, clinical, detached. She's stable, but she must never undergo surgery. It disrupts the reset sequence. Reset sequence. The words echoed through the basement, chilling enough to make my spine twitch. Was I an experiment? A patient? A subject? Then the tape crackled softly, and another voice emerged. My mother, soft, breaking, desperate. Just make sure she doesn't remember. The basement felt colder, as if something unseen had stepped closer. My breath faltered, trembling in my chest. Everything I knew, every memory, every childhood moment, every truth she ever fed me suddenly felt manufactured, fabricated, controlled. And for the first time, standing in that dim, suffocating basement, surrounded by evidence of a life I never truly lived, I understood that my mother wasn't just hiding secrets. She was hiding me. The days after discovering the basement, secrets felt unreal, as if the world had quietly tilted without telling me. I walked through my own life like a stranger, every sound sharpened, every glance suspicious. I thought maybe the hospital notes, the cassette, the bizarre documents would be the darkest part of the truth. But they weren't. They were only the door. The watchers were waiting on the other side. It started small. I told myself I was being paranoid. Does that? Injury does that? Fear does that? But paranoia doesn't follow you into the pharmacy on a Tuesday morning with a man who moves like he already knows every step you'll take. He called himself Dr. Felix Rowan. He had the gentle voice of a grandfather and the eyes of someone who had rehearsed kindness. He stood beside me at the counter, the faint scent of antiseptic wafting from his coat as he leaned in just a bit too closely. I tried to ignore him, but as I left, I caught him in the convex mirrors, smiling at me with an expression that wasn't warm at all, more like confirmation. Then came the woman in the silver sedan. She sat there every night across from my house, engine off, hands folded on the steering wheel, white blonde hair braided tightly down her back, posture too upright to be casual. She never stepped out, never looked directly at me, but whenever I shifted the curtains, she'd lift her head slightly, like she could sense my movement. Eventually, my mother began checking the front windows before she even set down her keys, but she never mentioned the car, never acknowledged it. Avoidance so practiced it became its own confession. And then Jared, my cousin, the one who used to steal cookies with me under the table at Christmas. He came by to drop off groceries one afternoon, eyes darting, jittery like a child caught cheating. He pulled me aside, his voice thin and shaking. "I never knew what it meant," he muttered. "They paid me every summer to keep an eye on you. Make sure you didn't slip. They said if the renewal ever went wrong, I'd know by the way you walked, or the way you talked. He swallowed hard. I didn't want to believe it was anything serious. I thought it was something stupid, a trust fund or some medical thing. What renewal? I whispered. He stepped back instantly, fear sparking in his eyes. I don't know. I swear. I don't know anything else. He left so quickly he forgot his jacket. But the final push came from my mother's coworker, Helena Brigzan, older woman with brittle wrists and sharp instincts. She pulled me aside in the parking lot of the nursing home where my mother worked. Her breath smelled faintly of peppermint tea and worry. You're 18 now, she said. That's the age of activation. I stared at her. Activation? For what? Her gaze softened with pity. Be careful who you trust. It's not your mother you should fear. Not first. Not first. The wording hung in the cold air like a blade. By then, the watchers felt like a pattern tightening around me. A noose disguised as concern. People I'd known for years. People I'd never seen before. People who never should have known my name. Each one left hints. Fragments. Warnings. It all converged one evening when I stepped out to bring in the mail. The silver car door opened soundlessly, and the woman with the white blonde hair approached. She moved like a ghost, her steps too smooth, too quiet. Evelyn Harper, she said, her voice soft enough that only I could hear it. You ask questions now. That changes the timeline. My throat closed. Who are you? She didn't smile. Someone who knows how far this goes? I stepped back, but she followed by only a single controlled inch. Your guardian was chosen before you were born. The words hit me like a blunt force. My guardian. She leaned closer, hair catching the porch light like strands of frost. Her breath chilled my cheek, and she knows you're asking questions. For a moment, the world around me vanished. The street, the house, the wind all swallowed by the weight of her whisper. Because it wasn't a threat, it was a deadline, and whatever was coming was already watching me. The county records office sat at the edge of town like a forgotten relic. Faded bricks, dusty windows, the kind of place where secrets didn't get lost but rather settled quietly into corners, waiting for the right pair of hands to disturb them. Lena parked close to the entrance and turned to me with that same fierce loyalty she'd carried since childhood. But beneath it, I could see fear tightening her jaw. Last chance, she whispered. If we open this door, we can't pretend anymore. I stopped pretending the night I fell, I murmured, gripping the walker, forcing my unsteady legs to cooperate. I need to know. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Rows of metal drawers rose around us like mausoleums of forgotten lives. The clerk, an elderly man who looked half asleep, barely glanced up when I requested access to Margaret Stone's file. He slid a clipboard toward me without a word, and after I signed, he disappeared into the back. The silence felt wrong. Too still. Too expectant. 10 minutes later, he returned, carrying a thin folder far too thin for someone legally tied to my childhood. He placed it on the counter with an expression I couldn't read. Strange case, he muttered. Good luck. Good luck. My stomach twisted, but I took the folder, thanked him, and followed Lena to a small wooden table near the archives. The first page was a death certificate. Margaret Stone. Deceased 5 years before I was born. I blinked hard, rereading the date as if it might rearrange itself into something sensible, but it didn't. She'd been dead provably and legally, long before my first breath, and yet her signature appeared on medical forms from when I was 3, 6, 10, authorizing treatments, denying certain procedures, approving transfers. Her handwriting was identical each time. Lena let out a shaky breath. So if she's dead, who's been signing her name? I didn't answer. Couldn't we kept flipping through the pages, searching for anything that made sense? There wasn't much. Just scraps and signed reports. Photocopied letters, blank forms with her name typed at the top. It felt intentionally incomplete, like someone had curated what we were allowed to see. Then we reached the last item, a sealed envelope, my name written on the front in dark ink, Evelyn Harper underlined once, sharply. The ink looked old, cracked at the edges, yet unmistakably deliberate. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph, glossy and faded at the same time, as though it had lived too long in both shadow and light. I was 4 years old, smiling, clutching a woman's stuffed bag with one hand, but the other hand, the hand I held tightly, belonged to him. The gray-suited man, the man from the railing, the man from our childhood walk home, the man my mother insisted was imaginary. There he was, standing beside the younger version of me, tall and rigid, his expression unreadable, like he'd been waiting for someone to notice he was there. On the back of the photo, written in looping cursive, she is to protect her, even from her own mother. My breath shortened. Protect me from what? I whispered. Lena's eyes widened, but before she could speak, another slip of paper slid out from the envelope and drifted onto the table. A second photograph, I picked it up with dread prickling my skin. The colors were clearer, newer. The date printed in the corner made my body go cold. It was from next week, exactly 7 days from today. In the photo, I stood beside a hospital bed, older, injured me, my hair tied back the same way it was now. My hand rested on the rail as if steadying myself. But it was the person lying in the bed that made my stomach drop. It was me, pale, motionless, tubes running from my arms, eyes closed. A perfect mirror of myself, aged exactly as I am now. Lena stepped back, her hand clamping over her mouth. Evie, how is that even? I couldn't answer, because as I stared at the photo, a realization slithered quietly into my mind. Margaret Stone wasn't protecting a child, she was protecting a cycle. And if that second photo was real, then something or someone had already decided how my next week would end. I found her sitting at the kitchen table, the overhead light flickering just enough to make her look older than she ever had before. My mother, Charlotte Harper, the woman who raised me with rigid routines and suffocating rules, had my childhood photo albums spread open in front of her like a confession laid bare. For as long as I could remember, those albums were forbidden, off-limits locked away in her bedroom closet. Seeing them now, open and trembling under her fingertips, made something inside me twist painfully. She didn't look up when I entered. She just exhaled, a long, defeated breath that rattled as though she'd been holding it for decades. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were swollen and red. Not angry, just unbearably tired. I tried to stop them, she whispered. I tried to keep you human. The room felt colder suddenly. I sat down across from her, my walker squeaking softly. What does that even mean? Her hands shook as she closed the album and pressed her palm against its cover, like she was bracing herself against the past. Evelyn, you were never supposed to know. Not this way. Not yet. I waited. I didn't speak, didn't move. My heartbeat filled my ears until she finally continued, each word dragging itself out like it weighed her down. You weren't born to me. You weren't even placed with me legally. You were assigned. The word landed like a blow. She swallowed hard. You were part of a research program called Project Guardian, a generational study, a preservation effort. Her voice cracked. Designed to replicate human consciousness across multiple bodies, to continue a life indefinitely through renewal. My chest tightened as if the air had turned to iron. Renewal, I echoed, like the tape said. She nodded painfully. Your renewal cycle was triggered if anything compromised the body. You were in illness, injury, or even deterioration. The handlers would retrieve you, and then the next Evelyn would begin. Memories transferred. Life continued. I felt sick. Mom, you said before that I wasn't the first. She shut her eyes, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. You were the third. Evelyn 3. Margaret Stone handled the first cycle. Another woman handled the second. When they gave you to me, I tried to break away. I tried to raise you normally. No resets, no transfers, no experiments. I wanted to stand, to scream, to undo every part of this conversation. But my legs were too weak and the truth too heavy. Why did the man in the gray suit follow me? I asked, voice barely audible. She didn't hesitate. He wasn't following you. He was monitoring you. He's the handler. And when a renewal is due, he retrieves the subject. That's his job. That's always been his job. My breath faltered. So when I fell, he came to collect you. She choked. I blocked the surgery to stall the process. Surgery would have revealed the abnormalities in your physiology. They'd have confirmed what you are, and they'd have taken you immediately. Her voice broke into a whisper. I didn't want to lose you again. The candle on the stove flickered, though no window was open. Something shifted in the air on unseen pressure, as though the past itself had come to stand between us at the table. I reached for her hand, but she flinched, not from fear of me, but of what she knew would come next. She had been right. Decades passed. I ran. I hid. I lived as quietly as I could in a remote town where no one asked questions, where no renewal cycle could find me. I aged, I hurt, I loved, I lost. I became human on my own terms, the only version of Evelyn to ever grow old. I thought I was free, but last night, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the doorbell chimed. The sound split through the silence of my house, like the memory of cracking wood and a 2-story fall. I shuffled to the door, heart pounding with the dread I hadn't felt in 60 years. When I opened it, the porch light blinked once, casting a pale glow over the figure standing outside, a tall man in a gray suit. His eyes softened when he saw my almost kindly. Mrs. Harper, he said, with that calm, ageless voice, it's time. Your successor is ready. And then he stepped aside. Behind him stood a young woman, 18 years old. Hair just like mine, eyes just like mine, a face I had forgotten how to see in the mirror. She looked exactly like I did the night everything changed.